Good afternoon and welcome back to the book club, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. Uh, we have a very special interview for you. We have author and filmmaker Chris Micklos, my neighbor from Wisconsin. We're going to be talking about his book, Ticktown. I've got some questions about movies and just whatever else we can get into today. So, without further ado, Chris, how are you?
Nat, how you doing? No,
I'm
I'm
good,
good. How are
thanks.
you doing? Thanks for having me.
Of course. For those who may not be familiar with you, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, as you said, my name is Christopher Micklos. I'm a filmmaker and an author from Madison, Wisconsin. Lived in Madison for most of my adult life. And for many years, I was a partner and ran a media consulting firm and did like political media and advocacy media. And then it's going on 9 or 10 years now ago. My partners and I, who'd always said, we've got all this equipment, we've got all this video stuff, we should make a movie. We decided after about 20 years we're going to make a movie, and so we set out to make a feature film back in 2016, and we did. Too much to our surprise, we made a full-length feature called The Nursery, which was like a old 70s style ghost story. We were shocked that we finished it, but we were just flabbergasted when we found a distributor that wanted to put out the movie. We got into some film festivals. We found a distributor who got us onto all the regular normal platforms, and we just had a ball doing it. And so in 2018, we made a second movie called The Headmistress, which was also a ghost story. Totally fun thing. We had some investors actually this time, and one of them had just bought a piece of property that had a old abandoned and so 1940s the old nuns used to live in, and so we made The Headmistress back in 2016-17, and then in 2018 it was released by Indican Pictures. So it was a pretty cool thing.
Um, that sounds like it would be a lot of fun, honestly.
It was fun. We made that movie over the course of about 13 days at this nunnery in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, and all the actors and then my co-director and I moved in, and it was like a big camp thing. We all lived together at the site of the film for about 13 days. The crew kind of came in and out. And it was a ball. We kicked off our first night there was a Friday the 13th, so that was very appropriate. But it was a blast. It was a blast. It was a lot of fun to make, and we were again thrilled to find distribution, and now you can find that kind of everywhere you get your streaming entertainment.
I was actually going to ask you about that too because I wanted to check some of them out here pretty soon.
I always say Tubi because it's free. I mean, you can buy or rent them. Wherever
Right.
you do, you can get them on DVD. But Tubi's free streaming, and they're very good to filmmakers. So I would say check them out on Tubi if you want to check them out.
Perfect. Tell us a little bit about your debut novel, Ticktown.
Well, after making The Headmistress, which took a couple of years plus, and then during that whole period of about 8 years or so, I was also writing spec scripts and trying to find someone to either produce the spec scripts or a literary manager to represent me. Um, but I'd never really written much fiction, and so in that period, I started just writing, kind of traditional prose fiction, whatever you want to call it, and got some stories published in various magazines and sites, and then really kind of got the itch to write a novel. Because as fun as it is to make movies, and it is so much fun, it is a Herculean task to make a movie. You have to find, especially at our level, we're very micro budget. You kind of have to scrimp and scratch for crew, and most of our money, all our money went into our actors, and we paid all our crew, but you get into debt pretty quickly. And it takes years to do because of the, the editing time and, and on and on. So I thought it would be fun to write a novel because it's something I can do on my own. I like to just sit down and write. And so I had at that time started getting interested in pulp fiction. It was pulp horror of fiction. I read this book. You may have heard of it. It's called Paperbacks from Hell, and it's by Grady Hendrix and Will Erickson, and it's basically a survey of the pulp horrorbacks of the 19. I got real interested in those books. I started reading some of those books, and I thought, this is the kind of book that I want to write. I want to write pulp horror. And so I've always liked creature features. I like the big bug kind of animal attack books and movies. And so I looked around and I thought, there's a lot of spider stuff. There's a lot of ant stuff. There's crabs. There's kind of everything, but there's not a lot of ticks. And I'm in Wisconsin where there are a lot of ticks. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of giant mutant ticks seemed like a real winner for a Wisconsin set horror novel.
Yeah, definitely. That's here in Iowa too. It is especially in the warm months.
Yes.
Wear a hat, wear long sleeves if you're going outside in the woods or around trees, because sometimes you won't even know.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did my research. I kind of found out a little bit about them. Once I started looking at, a lot of sources, I started to realize how just horrible they are. I mean, they're really grotesque little creatures, and they're nasty, and they've got these fearsome mouth parts, and the fact they just they tear into your skin and then jam their their sucker down into you and suck it out. I mean, it's really horrible. The whole thing is just terrible. And I thought that at a 10,000 times scale would be a pretty horrifying thing. And so so Ticktown ends up to be about a rural Wisconsin tourist town that's getting ready for its annual fall festival, and the town gets overrun by these giant mutant ticks, and hijinks ensue.
That sounds it's going to be a good read for sure, because that's right up my alley, because it honestly it gives me Starship Trooper vibes.
I would say that is definitely Starship Troopers was an inspiration. The old 50s and 60s sci-fi movies like Them, or Mantis, or movies like that are very much an inspiration. And then on the fictional level, there's definitely some Jaws in its DNA, some kind of nods to Jaws, but also one of my favorite authors is Guyan Smith, who is a Welsh writer, and his seminal work was called Night of the Crabs, and this is very much an homage to Night of the Crabs.
Yeah, because the cover of the book gives me almost like 1950s kind of movie poster vibes is really what it gives me when I look at it. So I was like, okay, that's kind of where the Starship Troopers thing came for me. It's because it's kind of what it reminded me of.
Oh, totally. If you don't mind my saying, so when we had my first conversation with my publisher, Castlebridge Media, when we were just kind of still feeling them out and trying to decide who to side with, I said, you guys seem great, really appreciate, your interest in Ticktown, but, this book needs a cover that's reminiscent of those 70s and 80s paperbacks with the monster on front. And they said, well, why don't you tell us, or why don't you send us what you're thinking? So I went and I grabbed about 50% of the artwork I grabbed was 70s and 80s paperbacks, and then the other 50% was movie posters from the 50s and 60s. So it's funny that you say that. And I said, I want something that looks like this. So now when I want people to get a sense of what Ticktown is like, I have an image where the poster for Them is on one side of it. The cover for Night of the Crabs is on the other side, and right in the middle is Ticktown. And I think it fits right in.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's because I was talking to my friend about it too. I showed him the cover, and he's like, "That really gives that it almost like a movie." And I'm like, "Right? It literally is." You're going and, but yeah, it's one of my favorites, honestly.
Appreciate it.
Would you say as a writer that your filmmaking has kind of helped you develop your writing, or would you say it's more completely separate, like it's two different sets of skills?
I do think it has. I think maybe for another kind of writing, maybe script writing and filmmaking wouldn't be all that helpful. But especially for pulp horror, which is very, straightforward and propulsive and, keeps, you got to keep it moving. I found that as I improved, and I think I did over the course of years with my script writing, that definitely played into what I hope is success writing this novel, because my early scripts were just page long chunks of description, and then you realize that's not what a script is supposed to look like. It's supposed to be hard hitting, and no paragraph is more than 4 lines long, and it's got to be succinct and to the point and an economy of language. And so I set out to do that with Ticktown too. I wanted shorter paragraphs. I wanted, more hard hitting sentences, try and carve away kind of the fat. And I think to an extent I achieved that. But then interestingly, one of my early reviewers made a comment about how it almost reads like a movie. And in fact, in one part, he talked about how one sequence, you could it almost felt like you were watching a slow motion action in a film. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't intended it that way, but it's definitely how I visualize and how I think. And so that clearly that had an influence on my writing for sure.
Right. I think those are the best kinds of books to read, though, because at least for me, I'm that what I like to call a visual reader. Like if you can put that image in my head and almost as if I'm watching a movie in my head, I will continue reading the whole thing in one shot because it's keeping me engaged enough. If I'm having a hard time picturing, oh man, that's too far fetched, or that has nothing to. You're like, what am I doing? Why am I trying to navigate this?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. One of my favorite horror writers is Richard Matheson, and I don't think that there's any. It's not a coincidence that he wrote novels, short stories, and movies and TV shows. I think I'm just like you in the way that I respond to writing.
Yeah, and it's a great thing too. I know some people who get annoyed by it when I say that because they're like, "Well, you can't visualize everything." I'm like, "Well, if I can't, I have a hard time kind of." I'm a very engaged person. Like you have to keep my attention because I can't read a lot of books just because I get bored. Like
sure,
but
sure.
if you can throw nonstop at me, then oh man, we're good.
Good. Well, all right. We're right on the same page, I think.
Right. Outside of writing and filmmaking, what are some of your hobbies?
What are some of my hobbies? Well, one thing I like to do is I play a lot of tennis, so that is definitely a hobby. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and so she is very much a hobby because that takes up a lot of time, kind of doing dad things. And she has very recently gotten into theater and musical theater, and that's my wife and I have always been interested in that. So I've got to say, currently that's a hobby. We spend a lot of time listening to Broadway show tunes, and we were just in Chicago to see a show on Broadway in Chicago, and we're going to New York next month to see it. So that's definitely a hobby. I mean, it's an expensive hobby, but it's a hobby. But I like to play tennis. I like to read. I like to write. You can't see it under my shirt, but I've got a little. I've got a brace on because I have it's a mix of tennis elbow and video game elbow, I have to admit. So that's how I spend my time.
I mean, it sounds like it's enough to keep you busy, though.
Well,
the kid alone.
Yeah. She's a handful. I mean, she's in school, and that takes up a good chunk of her day, but it's summer vacation now, and she's away this week. She's at Girl Scout camp, and she's got camps all summer, so it'll give me a little time to write. So I'm excited about that.
Right. Well, the thing is, though, too, with that is what I think is the interesting part is you and your wife can take and show her kind of what we would call the classics of Broadway and film and musicals
Yeah.
that most people her age probably either don't know about or don't care to dig and find.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm in my basement office, and elsewhere in our basement, um, I have a lot of old horror memorabilia. I've got like uh, Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff signed, autographs and stuff like that. So our house has always kind of been immersed, especially in that classic horror stuff. So she's kind of always been exposed to it. She's been a little bit. She's been a little bit, or was for a while, a little bit resistant to it. But every Halloween, the theaters around here play like some of those old movies, double features, and so I've dragged her along every year to go see like Frankenstein and the Mummy double feature, and she's fallen asleep once or twice. And that's fine. But I found that more recently, like she's really gotten into. She was really into the Wednesday Addams series, and every Halloween we try to go through every Simpsons Treehouse of Horror in the month leading up to Halloween, and so we have a ton of fun with it. And it's like you say, it's the same thing with the Broadway stuff. She's very much into these, the modern stuff like Heathers, and there's one she loves called Ride the Cyclone. And meanwhile, I'm humming Fiddler on the Roof and South Pacific and
Yep.
Les Mis, and there's got to be a marriage of the two.
Right.
Yeah.
Funny you say that too, because I was actually in the South Pacific.
Oh, were you really?
Yep. I played Captain Brackett.
Nice.
Yeah, that was my first like opening into musical theater. We did that, and then we actually did Fiddler on the Roof after that. That I did not play anything. I just did some gaffing. I didn't.
Okay.
Didn't really want to try my hand at that one. I was like,
Oh, here. Well, there's a lot of female parts in Fiddler too. Yeah. So there's a lot more female than male.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have a particular scene or character that you really enjoyed writing in Ticktown more than the others?
Wow, that's a great question. That's no one has asked me that question. I think that I'll give you two answers. There is a mayor character who's the mayor of the small town. His name is Mayor Kankerby, and he's kind of like a smarmy local politician. And he was fun to write because villain would be too strong a word, but he's definitely, he gives a little bit of Mayor Vaughn vibes from Jaws, but I think of him more as like an old boss hog from the old Dukes of Hazzard show, kind of rotund and little bit corrupt, and so he was a favorite character to write because I got to indulge kind of a lot of my instincts for smarminess and that sort of thing. And so I really liked writing that character. And no, I won't give any spoilers, but there's one scene in particular that I loved writing with him. And then there is, this is kind of a spoiler, but a very minor spoiler, but there is a discovery in the third act of the novel of a nest where they finally discover the nest of giant ticks. And that was a blast to write because it ends up being several chapters long and it's very propulsive. It just kind of plows forward and it's action upon action upon action and horror and nastiness. And that was a blast. That was a blast. Yeah.
So this one might seem a little weird considering you've been doing a lot of writing for most of your life, it seems. But have you ever gotten a piece of writing advice that you still hang on to this day that you remind yourself of, that you're like, okay, that was good. I didn't know that. Let me add that to my knowledge.
There was actually, and I honestly could not I honestly don't remember who or where I saw the advice, who gave it to me. But at one point, and this was like just in the last several years, somewhere I stumbled across the idea of write the novel that you would want to read. And that was very much like a driving force when I sat down for Ticktown, because I was loving these old 70s and 80s paperbacks. I was loving that kind of story. And so I was looking for more modern authors who were playing on that field. And and there definitely are some, but there's not a ton who are doing it, with good quality, I think. And so I thought, I want to read this story. I want to read this kind of book. So that's what I'm going to write. And, I've been a filmmaker. I've written, short fiction and stuff. I shouldn't be nervous about like people reading my stuff. But when I finished Ticktown, I was incredibly apprehensive as my first novel to give it to anyone. And so when I finally brought myself to give it to my best pal, Jay, who doesn't read this sort of book, I was like, look, I don't know if this is going to be your thing. And I don't know if you're going to like it. And frankly, I don't know if it's any good or if it's just a mash of crap. But I realized when I gave it to him, and I told him, I said, but this is exactly the novel that I set out to write. Like when I went and read it, I was like, this is the novel that I was trying to write. The pacing, the tone, everything about it was what I wanted it to be. And so I was like, that's kind of good enough. You may hate it, my friend. You're not going to hate it, man. You're going to love it. He may have hated it, but I thought, but it's exactly what I wanted to write. And so that's something, and that's maybe enough.
Yeah, exactly. Because the other thing too is like that I think stands out that goes with that is like you write what you know. Because if you set out to, especially I've found for first time authors, if you set out to write something and you're writing about something you have no idea about, you did no research on, that bleeds through in your writing and in the story, and people can kind of pick up on that. And a lot of my friends have never DNF'd books, but they're like, look, man, I just found this one that I absolutely could not finish because it seemed like there was no passion. It was really dry. And it didn't really get me excited to keep reading.
Yeah.
So that's another thing too, because people can tell. It's quite obvious.
No, I think you're definitely right. I think you're 100% right about that. Though on the write what you know thing, I will say there's a fair amount of like gunplay and explosives and stuff like that in this book that I really don't know anything about. And so I was doing a lot of research on it, and I was, all over Google and trying to find, sites that, were all about that stuff. And I waited with bated breath for the FBI to show up at my door because I was like talking about homemade explosives and how would you go about blowing up a chemical tank. I thought I was very lucky to not be arrested.
And I get that from a lot of people. I've interviewed some people who are like write urban fantasy and sci-fi fiction, and they're like, I'm glad nobody has gone through my computer because I would have to emphatically make the statement that I swear I'm not a serial killer.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But it's like, come on, you're just trying to do your best to make things as accurate and as knowledgeable as possible.
Yep.
Which in the end is what counts. Because if I remember correctly, I thought I saw that you had been published with short stories and things like that in magazines as well, correct?
Yes.
Are you still doing that, or are you just sticking to the book world currently?
So when I finished Ticktown, kind of put my energy into like trying to find an agent and to find a publisher. Took a brief break to write a short story for an anthology that's coming out of Wisconsin, horror stories. But then I kind of wanted to jump right into, I had an idea for a second novel and I wanted to jump right into that. So I really spent much of the last year or so working on that second novel. And then have been very excited. I'm very close to finishing. I've been through a few drafts and I'm very close to wrapping that up. And I have, there's a couple of short things that I want to write that I've been kind of excited about. My short fiction is more like my gateway to horror was the old horror comedies like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and the old Bob Hope movies. And
Yeah.
so I really love horror and humor. So most of my short fiction is horror and humor. And so I've got a couple of those that I've really been kind of like, the jokes have been percolating in the head. So when I finish that second book, I want to write a couple of short things. And then I've actually got my third book mapped out, and I want to jump into that. So, I don't know how far I'll get this summer vacation, but I'm going to try and get as much done as I can.
That seems to be a good problem to have, though. You have one project after another that you're like, okay, well, I finished this. What should I do? Should I just sit here? No, hey, I've got another idea. I call them rainy day ideas.
That's a good.
Because you never know. That's just like it goes with one of the pieces of advice I was given was to never throw anything out.
Yes.
You could get a couple of paragraphs in and you're like, oh man, I don't like this. Don't get rid of it. Let it sit and see what happens. Because I just finished another book of mine that I just sent off that was meant at first to be a novella. And it sat there with 2 paragraphs for 4 years. And then I got my debut book just published in March. And I was like, what next? So I was going through my drive and I saw it and I was like, wait a second. Okay, I think I can do something with this. And 50,000 words later, here we are.
Congratulations on your debut, by the way.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. Was it completely nerve-wracking?
Oh, not as much because I work in the publishing industry for an indie publisher.
Okay.
So, and I do stuff like this all the time.
Okay.
So it wasn't unfamiliar for me. And I can, the hardest part for me though was I can sit here and talk about your book all day long, but if you ask me about my book, man, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Like I can give you, hey, it's a crime fiction mystery, and tell you the setting. But anything past that, I'm like, okay, I don't know. What do you want to know?
So did you do a lot of this? Were you doing a lot of like stuff to promote or?
Not really. My experience was kind of a little different just because, like I said, I do this for a living. So we had so many books coming out for the company that I will admit I didn't have a lot of time for my own,
Sure.
Which is fine because I didn't go in with the delusion that, hey, oh my God, I'm going to be a huge writer. I'm going to be a huge author. We're going to sell 1 million copies.
Sure.
And I think to this point, we've sold like 35, maybe.
It's 35 people. That's 35 people reading your book.
Exactly. But no, I think I've done 2 interviews and then the rest has just been, I hit heavily on ARC readers, to get in on early reviews,
Sure,
and things like that. And other than that, I mainly focus on graphics and just because that's my wheelhouse. I create graphics all day long, so for me, that's my wheelhouse. So I'm like, oh well, I'll just do that, and I just made a bunch that you can throw a sentence or 2 with, or the tagline. Be like, oh hey, the ebook's $3.99 with. So I've got a 4.4 on Amazon and whatever other things you want to pull and add to it. But yeah.
Do you? I'm asking. I don't want to put us off the rails on the interview, but do you do graphic novels and comic books too, or
no? That is out of my wheelhouse.
Okay.
But like I can do, if you need book promotions, so say a book review graphic or a cover reel graphic or a thumbnail or things like that. Oh God, yeah. I do that all day long in my sleep. Like I've showed you your thumbnail already.
Yeah.
That one was a quick one for me, but it still turned out really well.
Yeah.
So it's just things like that. It's always been just a fun little thing for me to do. And I try to help other indie authors when they need help. Like if they're like, hey man, I'm stuck. I'm like, well, send me your cover so I can because I use Canva. So if I put your cover in there, I can pull every single color code that's used in your cover or your graphic and extract them, and then create your review graphic or your
Oh,
thumbnail
very cool.
using those exact colors. So then you have
Yeah.
a product that when you put it side by side with your cover, the shade is exactly the same.
Right. Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah. So it's that's what I do.
Yeah. Is that, by the way, is that how all us indie authors sound? Hey man, I'm stuck.
I mean, I don't judge because I've been there.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things that there's no shame in asking for help, because what I always tell people is, I'm like, we're in the same boat.
Yeah.
We're not Stephen King's, we're not Sarah J. Maas's. Like, we have to, as a community, have to stick together. Yes, we're all trying to fight for sales, but at the same time, if we're like, hey man, why don't you promote your book in this thread, or can I help you with this graphic? It's not that we're trying to like, oh, my book's better than yours. It's, hey man, I have a free minute. This is what I do. Can I give you a quick hand?
Yeah.
And you just do it where you can. And that's the thing that I love, though, because I don't get paid for any of this. I do probably 20, 30 graphics a week.
Oh wow.
I don't get paid for it.
Yeah.
I don't even care. If it helps you get sales, cool. If it helps take something off your plate, so maybe you can do an interview like this that may be more beneficial, cool. If not, you got something for a rainy day that you can use to be like when you're out of ideas.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great.
Yeah,
It's funny you said, when you said before, you said, "Oh, I didn't set out to sell 1,000,000 copies." When I talked to my agent about, I was like, "What?" I have no idea what success looks like in this small, publisher. And I felt like an idiot asking, because I didn't even know what numbers to throw at him, because I wanted to say, oh, what would be like a hit book, like 5 million copies, 1,000,000 copies, 50,000 copies. I didn't even know what number to throw out, and I was shocked by the number he gave me, because it was much smaller than I was expecting. But it's kind of like, I love my family, I love my friends, but when you tell them you have a book coming out, the first thing they always ask is, "Oh, I'm in Wichita, Kansas. Which bookstores is it going to be in my community?"
Yeah.
Or when when our movies came out, everyone's like, "Oh, that's great. So is it going to be on 1,500 screens, or is it going to the people don't have a concept of what, like,
Right.
a small movie or a small book, what to expect out of it.
Yes.
So I appreciate the supportiveness, but it's like, you got to say, "Oh, no, it's not like that. It doesn't work like that."
Yeah, it's disappointing for those who come into it expecting like really huge process and like this, it's going to be
Yeah.
everywhere. But it also, if you're not self-publishing, it really depends on the process that your publisher uses. Like, for example, our authors, so we use the books to read platform. So basically
Okay.
it will show you, you click on my link, it'll tell you exactly every single place you can find it in ebook and exactly every single place you can find it in paperback, and they're clickable links with that's basically their icons of the stores, and then you can click on it, and so you don't have to be like, oh, you can only get it on Amazon, or where can I get it? Here's this link. It tells you every single place it's available.
Cool.
Just another way to like simplify that for people. And instead of having like, well, it's here,
Yeah.
this is what it is. And it's been really helpful. And one of the biggest things too is just tell people, you just got to get out there. The online sales are great, but the more places you'll find is doing in-person events. You never know what library or what local bookstore. We've had authors go into their local bookstores and be like, hey, I wrote this book. Here's a copy. If you like it, maybe we can make a deal where you keep 4 in here, and or something like that. So really, it's just, you have to hit the pavement, so to speak.
Right.
There's no magic number, no magic cure, no magic formula to give you. I mean, I wish there was.
Yeah. I will. I'll tell you on that road, kind of the most delightful experience I've had so far in this process lately has been, like you're saying, I was out very much. I mean, I hit my local bookstores, but I also, I cultivated a list of all the independent bookstores in Wisconsin, and I've been reaching out to them via email and stuff. And then, since we're close to Chicago, we're close to the Twin Cities. I reached out to a number of, especially ones that seemed like they would have a interest or specialization in horror, and so I reached out to this bookstore in Chicago called Bucket of Blood, and I wrote to him and said, "Hey, here's my book. Here's a one sheet about my book. If you're interested, it's got a great cover graphic. I think it'll look great on your shelves." And the owner wrote me back and said, "Oh no, yeah, we've had this on pre-order for a couple weeks already." And I was like, "Yes, that that was just someone found it without me having to like shake them and beg them to stock it. So that made me extremely happy."
It's the little wins. It's the little things, I tell you, and it's. Like, for example, I just found out I had another review. I found out like a couple days ago.
Awesome.
And I was like, oh, I didn't know this was there. How exciting.
That's right. That's right. I didn't beg that person to review it. They just reviewed it.
Right. Yeah. Because, that's one of the things, too. You don't want to obsessively check because it will just drive you nuts, honestly.
Yeah.
A really hard question coming at you now. I don't know if you're ready for this one. During long writing sessions, what is your go-to beverage or snack?
Great one. I am very much a coffee drinker, and I find that I'm most productive in the mornings. So I try to write in the mornings as much as I can, and I'm very lucky because I work from home and I can, my daughter goes off to school, but I'll tend to get up at like 5 or 5:30, try and write for a few hours, do whatever I have to do to get her off to school, and then I'll write for a couple more hours if I'm up to it. And so it's coffee. So I'm just pumping coffee all morning long.
I'm right there with you on that one. I've got in my house we literally have 4 different kinds of coffee makers.
There you go.
Excluding the French press. So literally you can just have your pick of how the real question is, how fast do you want
it? Yeah. I think the toughest decision when it comes to writing is, am I going to use 5 Keurig pods or am I going to actually make a pot this morning? That's yeah.
Well, too, because like you start with Keurig, but then you're like, oh man, this is getting to be a deep writing session. I didn't think I was going to get this far into it. So then you're like, should I make a pot? Oh, I don't know. Let's push a new. To hell with it. Let's just make one.
Exactly. But then I do, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. So if I don't cut it off by mid-afternoon, there's like consequences later in the day. So.
Yep. I hear that one. That's for sure. That's you don't want to be up all night. That's for sure. No. Before we end off today, do you have any signings or events or anything coming up that you would like to share with everybody?
Oh, sure. Thanks for asking that. Actually, so it sounds like the book comes out on June 24th. So that's going to be very exciting. But then a few days later on June 28th, here in the Madison area, I'm going to have a book launch event. And what I'm doing is I'll be hosting a screening of the 1954 movie Them, the Big Ant horror movie Them, at our theater in Sun Prairie called the Marcus Palace Cinema. It's a big chain in Wisconsin, Marcus, and just outside Wisconsin. So we're going to host the screening of Them there. It's going to be at 4:30 on Saturday, the 28th. And then following the movie, I'll do a signing and a reception. They have a bar lounge area. So we're going to move over to the bar lounge, Take 5 Lounge, and do a signing and reception. And what's kind of fun about the event is that, people's ticket to the event will be a paperback copy of Ticktown. So if you bring in a copy of Ticktown, that'll get you 2 seats to the screening. And then I'll be there to sign it afterwards. And so we've got a number of local bookstores that are going to be carrying the book when it comes out, so they can go to their local bookstores. They can get it on Amazon. If they've got Prime, they'll get it in time for the screening. And then we'll be at the theater, and we'll have books to buy at the theater if someone wants them. So if you come with a friend or a spouse or whatever, there's two of you, you get one book. That's only $7.50 a person, for a $15 book. So that's you're not going to find a better movie deal than that. So I think it's a fun way to kick off the book.
Definitely the most unique I've heard, for sure.
Oh, great.
And if you guys want to check the book out or follow Chris on socials, I will have all of those linked in the description below, so you can head on over and check it out and see what the buzz is all about. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Matt, this was great. So enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Have a great rest of your day.